right, folks. Welcome, everybody, to Irish Sports Daily Power Hour. I'm your host, Mike Frank, here with Jamie Uyeyama. We'll have Greg Flamong is going to produce the show, and he'll come on and offer some comments here and there. Before we get started, wanted to mention once again, it's a great time to sign up for Irish Sports Daily. You can go to the front page, click on the premium section, and you can sign up today. There's lots going to be happening here in the next week. Also, if you've not subscribed to our YouTube channel, go to YouTube and search for Irish Sports Daily, and you can subscribe to our channel there. We also have the podcast, our Power Hours, also live, so you can watch, Jamie and I live talking about everything, the game and recruiting, all that kind of stuff. You can find the actual Power Hour on YouTube. So go to YouTube, search for Irish Sports Daily, click subscribe, and also like the videos. That certainly helps us and will allow you to know when we're on. I want to apologize in advance for this. I got a cold here, Yama. It seems to happen to us at least a couple times a year, brother. And I know yours is coming sometime too.
Yeah, I know.
We get it every time. And when you have kids in school, this is what happens to you. It just does. So, anyway, want to apologize as well. Before we get going, I wanted to mention our sponsor, which is ESQ. ESQ Clothing has been making the best handmade custom suits, sport coats, tuxedos, and shirts for the last decade. Has been featured on GQ, ESPN, USA Today. You've seen them dressing your favorite players and coaches. ESQ only gets the best fabric from Italy and England's top mills. With over 40,000 fabrics to choose from, you're guaranteed to look your best. Go visit esqclothing.com and book your appointment. Mention ISD and get 10% off your entire purchase. Once again, that's esqclothing.com. All right, Yama, let's get into it. Obviously, when we left the show last week, we were hoping that we would be here in a good mood and talking about a national championship game, and here we are, brother. Here we are. So, yeah, it's interesting when you think about how they got here and what they've had to overcome. And I think the first thing that needs to be pointed out is, I don't know what's going to happen on Monday the 20th, but I'm telling you, Yama, they've already won. They've won. They've won. Whatever happens. To me, I feel like they've won the national championship already just because what they've had to overcome. I don't know what's going to happen in the game. They certainly have a chance to win, but the improbability of being able to overcome all the things that they have. And I wish the national media would mention it more. You know what I mean? I do. I wish they would say, on the broadcast, you'll hear, well, they're down a few starters. Let's point it out. Who? Yeah. And let's compare who Notre Dame is not playing with compared to who Ohio State is not playing with, or who Penn State is not playing with, because that really matters. It really does matter. And I think if we, let's be honest, if Notre Dame had guys like, Jordan Botello and Boubacar Traore and Riley Mills and a healthy Howard Cross and a healthy offensive line. I mean, when you think about it, this offensive line started with 6 starts to start the entire season among all of them, and now 4 of those guys won't be playing or might not be playing in this game. You bring in 2 guys, Jagusa hadn't played a single meeting.
He hadn't played a snap.
To do what they did is remarkable. And I think that's the thing that that's the story that people aren't getting. And I hope that the national media picks that up and says that a whole lot before this game, because, there's a chance Notre Dame may not play as well or stack up as well because of the injuries. And I don't think that discounts anything that Notre Dame has accomplished. And in the end, I don't expect Notre Dame to get blown out. It wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't be totally shocked if that happened, just because they're hurt so much. They're just hurt. But there's also a chance they could win. You just don't know what's going to happen with this team. But I do wish that they would say this, Jamie, because I think it's only fair. And I think it needs to be highlighted because it allows people to understand what this team has had to overcome and how amazing they really are. It is absolutely 100% amazing. By far the best coaching job I've ever seen out of anywhere. other than maybe the Detroit Lions right now, in how do you overcome adversity and continue to do what you're doing. So your thoughts here before we get into the game.
I can't agree more in terms of them not mentioning the fact that all the guys that Notre Dame has lost, or like not even just mentioning, like, I mean, you could see Howard Cross like hobbling around.
Yeah. It's
Like
terrible.
he is nowhere close to 100%, and he hasn't been for like probably 3/4 of the year. They are. I know that other teams have lost people, and you're going to play. You're playing the most games that you've ever played, so that's going to happen. But if any of these other teams had the losses that Notre Dame has,
They wouldn't be here.
Wouldn't be
No,
there.
no question.
They wouldn't be
No
there.
question.
And because of that, that's why I think you're exactly right. What they've accomplished to get here is incredible. The job the coaching staff has done, the job that all the guys who've remained healthy have done, the way they've like battled, the whole year, the way they've competed, like the way that other guys have stepped up and have like proven like their worth over the year, that you just don't see that to this extent that you've seen it normally. Like obviously Notre Dame has had these kind of devastating injuries in other years, and it's been like game over. It's been like the season's over. Like that's how it's been, and it obviously like this is it, the fact that they've been able to keep going. And I just, you've never seen anything like that where they've had this many major injuries. Particularly up front, where and you still are able to like function and win and do these things. That it's incredible. I just really just you can't say enough about the team, the heart of the team, the job the coaching staff did, like you said, just everything, single thing, where it's just kind of led to this point. Because if you look at where, Brian Kelly took them to a national championship game in 2012. Okay, they had the undefeated regular season. It's not comparable to this, and it's not even the injuries too. It's the fact that in order to get here, they had to beat 3 top 10 teams along the way, right? And obviously Ohio State.
Yeah,
no one ever had to do that. No one's had to do that. The only other team that's done it, Ohio State, is the only other team. So that's why they're obviously in really good company. And I think, the stupid thing with Kirk Herbstreit, where he was talking about, well, best over deserving. No, when you get to this point, when it's the playoffs, it's deserving. And guess what? Like, and I would say it's the 2 best too. If you just based on like everything we've seen too, you'd say it's the 2 best too. These are the 2 most deserving and the 2 best teams that are in the national championship, and really that's all you can ask for.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about best versus deserving, and even his argument failed because the people that he thought should be lost their bowl games. So it's like,
got embarrassed. Yeah,
exactly. And it's kind of ridiculous. But the other thing that I don't think people understand too is like, name the positions Notre Dame could not afford to lose starters. Offensive line, okay, 4 guys are out. You know what I mean? Notre Dame, we knew that pass rush was going to be the biggest key to them this year. Their 2 best are out. Then you take their 2 interior guys. We knew that the interior didn't have a lot of depth. Okay, well, Mills is now gone and Cross is hobbled, and Anye, by the way, is no longer playing with the team. So it's just like the places they couldn't even afford to lose players. Like they didn't have any depth. And these were the most important players on the team. Those are the guys that they're losing. I shouldn't say most important, but they really impact what's going to be. And when you're a line of scrimmage type of team, you can't afford to lose line of scrimmage people. And that's what I'm saying is why it's so impressive what they've been able to overcome, and the coaching job that we've seen when you look at Joe Rudolph and what he's done with this offensive line, it's remarkable. And really, even what Al Washington's done with that defensive line, remarkable. And Al Golden to be able to play at such a high level, considering how many very key pieces are out of the game, it just really is remarkable to see how much they've had to overcome and what that they have overcome it. Jamie, let's get into the game. The Penn State game. We talked about it on the post game. Tempo. First of all, I do think we need to give credit to Tom Allen, who's no longer at Penn State. He's now going to be a Clemson Tiger. But I think that their offensive coordinator and their defensive coordinator really did a good job in this game. I mean, I really think that they did an outstanding coaching job. And I think that that's been kind of glossed over a little bit as well. And they gave Notre Dame fits on both sides of the ball. They really did a good coaching job on this. So your thoughts there?
Oh, absolutely. I think Kotelnicki, who's their offensive coordinator, obviously he was the guy they brought in from Kansas, was the guy that we had tracked as a kind of a rising star with Notre Dame's openings the last couple of years, as he was a guy who was going to eventually get one of these jobs. He got the Penn State job. Man, he's just done a wonderful job with their team this year, obviously the whole year. I think so much of the credit deserves to go to him in terms of what he did scheme wise, in terms of their play action stuff. Obviously they hit Notre Dame a couple times with some screen stuff that really hit big at the right time. The run game stuff that he did, he kind of weaponized running against man coverage in a way that no one had done consistently against Notre Dame all year. And that was part of the reason why they had success specifically on the perimeter with their stuff that they did. Obviously, when you have guys like Nicholas Singleton, who had the best game I'd seen Nicholas Singleton play in terms of running, because he had not run through contact like that before. And I think he did a tremendous job. And, they did the right kind of things in terms of tempo, the right plan and everything. And really kind of what it came down to was they could, if you were going to say one thing, I thought he probably did about as good a job as any coordinator did against Notre Dame all year. Him and Lincoln Riley, pretty much, right? With what they did in terms of scheming up stuff. Ultimately, they didn't have the athletes outside who could win. Obviously, they had no catches at wide receiver. That's huge. And Aller was just not you can only do so much with what you have there at the quarterback position and what he can do. And then also too, it's just something that that's what Notre Dame does. You are going to have, your quarterback is probably going to have his worst game of the season against Notre Dame. That's just what it is. That's what Al Golden does. That's what, Mike Mickens and his group do. That's what everyone does there. And, they didn't even get into a situation where they had to be desperate to throw the ball. If it ever got to that, it would have been so much worse. But Aller, he hadn't, one of the reasons why they said at the end of the game, oh yeah, I would trust him here because he hadn't, he's only thrown this many interceptions, but he threw the ball to them twice earlier in the game. It just got called back. So, and that never happens. He had 7 turnover-worthy plays all season. 15 games, he played 7 turnover-worthy plays, 3 against Notre Dame, obviously. And, at least one of those should have probably counted as well, too. Yeah. And still, he had the worst NFL passer rating of the season. He was horrible in the straight drop back game. And obviously he threw the interception that really clinched it. And then I thought too, the one thing I would say with Tom Allen, obviously he did a good job and they have great material to work with. Those 2 edge rushers are Abdul Carter. Wow. Just can't believe the guy did that on one arm. Just incredible performance. That's what a top 5 pick looks like. That's exactly what it looks like. What an incredible player. But I think ultimately he probably blitzed too much in this game. And Notre Dame really kind of had answers for some of those, which is why, like on third down, you probably needed to blitz a little bit less, and they played a lot of man on third down. And Denbrock really kind of had a beat on that, and give it credit to like Notre Dame's receivers for executing and winning,
Yeah.
and then obviously Riley Leonard too for and Steve Angeli obviously for making throws.
It's interesting when you look at the situation, and they came out, they started on tempo. They were very, very aggressive, and Notre Dame did not handle that well. I also don't think they did a good job of kind of setting the edge. I thought Penn State did a really good job of getting outside on some run plays that we just hadn't seen in the past as much. Are you concerned that this is going to be something that we're going to see moving forward in this Ohio State game? Tempo, Notre Dame. Look, if I look at Notre Dame's situation on defensive line, and I'm Chip Kelly, I'm like, make them run, man, make them run, because they just don't have the bodies that they can push through, and that's what I would do. It's something Chip Kelly's done at Oregon, play with tempo. They haven't really done it much at Ohio State, but your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I think they will more than they have for sure. Like, I just
Yeah.
can't see them not doing it, just because, one, when we're talking about the depth on the defensive line, like there's only so many guys can rotate in. Obviously, they're only playing 3 defensive tackles right now. That's a big deal. Like, you got your corners who are playing like the entire game. There's just a lot there where you can just see guys like, and already they're obviously worn down from this long season, where it's just, they definitely, like, tempo really got Notre Dame in this game, and that was a big part of what they had success. But I would say some of the stuff too, where um you know their right guard, Salim Wormley, like he really, like, I mean, he reached, whether it was Gabriel Rubio, whether it was Heinisch, whether it was Cross, like that guy probably reached each one of those guys way too many times in that game. He won too much. Like, they were really like quick off the ball. I would say, because Ohio State, they basically have backups at guards right now, because they've had injuries on the offensive line too. So they're not quite, as kind of proficient as what, like execution wise, that Penn State, what you're going to see out of Penn State. But I mean, the way that I look at it, like, that was not a good game for those guys. When you get reached, anytime, like, obviously you're going to lose some reps. That's going to happen. But all it takes is like one gap, that you lose, and it can be like a huge play. And I would say, like, so Katron Allen turns it into a 20-yard run. Travion Henderson can turn it into 60, like,
That's
so
exactly
that, and that is really kind of the problem, where I think you saw it last year when they played, right? Like, Notre Dame played just a phenomenal defensive game last year against them, and really like whooped them up front, like absolutely whooped them, specifically on the interior, absolutely whooped them. But you get caught in a bare front against, when they're running counter trade, he bounces it out, and it's just basically he had to beat X Watson. If he breaks that tackle, he was gone, and he was gone, right? And that's the danger of all these things. It's like, you make one wrong call, one guy makes a mistake, and that can burn you. And that's the danger of playing Ohio State.
The other thing, when I look at the defense, the thing that kind of stood out in this game is you could just tell. I didn't know if it was flu, lethargic, what it was exactly, but just not the same level of consistency. Adon Schuler did not have a good game tackling. Also in coverage, just was not the same player that we saw. I thought the linebackers as a whole really did not play well. They did not react to what was happening in front of them well. Just were nowhere to be found a lot of times on these run plays, and it was frustrating to watch. Surprisingly, I thought the one guy who did play really well was KVA. I thought he came in and when he came in, could find the ball and made a lot of negative plays and did a lot of great things. I really hope these 11 days are going to help him get healthy, because he's got the type of ability to make a play in, the negative plays that you're looking for. I don't see a lot of guys on Notre Dame's linebacker core right now that have that ability to make these negative plays, the game changing, drive killing plays. And so I really hope we see him come into the game. But do you think it's just they're tired? I mean, man, 15 games is a long time, and it's kind of, they haven't had an off week for a while. It's a grind. And I think at the end of the day, it's when you got to play with that kind of intensity for that long, it's just really hard to play focused and intent. And as I said, kind of at the end of the post game show and in my commentary, it was a good time for this to happen for Notre Dame. It was a good time to not play your best game, because you got away with it, and now you have a chance to play another great game in this game. So just want to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, and I mean, what's funny about it too is that Notre Dame had all those things that happened in the game, yet they would have had two picks that were in the end zone, and it would have looked like a very normal game where it's like, hey, they didn't have their A game, but they held them to 10 points or whatever, because that's what it would have ended up being, right? They would have kept those points off the board, and obviously too, there was some egregious no holding calls that the one on Christian Gray, obviously. There was one on Josh Burnham too that was like, man, it was horrible. So there were things like that, but I do think that there was, some of it is guys were tired or whatever, but also too, I think you got to give credit to Penn State. Like, I really think that their guys played well. In particular too, I think one of the biggest differences between Penn State and Georgia was their tight ends on Penn State blocked. It was night and day. They were so much better blocking than Georgia's. Like, Notre Dame dominated Georgia's tight ends. They dominated Georgia's tight ends, and that did not happen in this game where
Warren was a monster. Dude.
Warren was a monster. Warren was a monster, and I mean that ultimately too. That's the kind of thing where Warren and guys like Warren and Carter, they were game wreckers in the game, and if they won the game, you would have said that's why they won the game, because of those guys, right? Because of Singleton, right? And that's the thing with Notre Dame is that, like you said, they need, which is why when you talk about like losing all the guys that they've lost, right? Like, even if Riley Mills, you're like, hey, this isn't Riley Mills' A game. He could come with one or two plays and just flip everything, because like just wreck a drive, right? And Botello, same thing, right? Boubacar, like Ben Morrison, obviously can make like a game-changing play, right? Like, and when you lose those guys, obviously they still have guys like, Christian Gray made a game-changing play in this game. Obviously, they've had guys do that. X Watts does it all the time, but they didn't even get that out of X Watts really in this game, right? Like, comparatively to what he normally does. So I think that is going to be a huge thing in this game where you're going to need, like you mentioned, the thing about KVA, like Snead obviously was like, he made plays. There was like 3 plays in this game where he maybe didn't even record a stat, but what he did to blow up the play was absolutely huge in the game. And similar to KVA too, right? Where even just like getting pressure or whatever, like that's the kind of thing that those make a difference in a game. They absolutely do. And you know what? And shout out to actually Jack Kaiser too, because right after, Notre Dame came and tied the game, Penn State's got a chance to get the ball. They still got a chance to drive it. Notre Dame gets a 3-and-out. Kaiser was awesome in that series. Awesome. Like, just really like turned it on. And it's funny because it was like, it was like the old announcer jinx where they were talking about, well, he doesn't want this to be his last game. And I was like, well, that always just seems to like end in something bad. But it just was like, no, he just went out and was like, yeah, he didn't want to be his last game. So he made like 3 plays in a row. And so it's going to take that kind of thing to really do it. And you're going to need more, obviously more havoc in this game from the defense. That actually might be the biggest thing that Notre Dame needs more than anything in this game is havoc from the defense to get those, to get them off schedule, to screw them up. Obviously, in this game for the Texas-Ohio State game, Ohio State was their own worst enemy in terms of penalties. Yeah. But like, if they're not doing that, then you have to create the negative plays to screw them up.
Yes. Now, here's the interesting thing. I want to see if you notice this. All right, so we talked about just the absolutely horrendous officiating in this game, and man, the short spots were ridiculous. I counted 7 that I counted that were just ridiculous how bad they were. But the one play that really stood out to me, if you want to know how really biased they were, it was the second to last drive, Penn State's second to the last drive, and their OC did a fantastic job. They had Warren on the left side of the offensive line, and they used him as bait. And they were running a crosser with him, and they knew that 2 players would be following Warren, and they used him as bait, and they were trying to slide Singleton out into the flat for either a dump there or possibly a wheel route. Well, what obviously Warren was supposed to do was to pick Jack Kaiser. And when you have 2 Notre Dame players plus Jack Kaiser there, of course you're going to screw some things up. Somehow Jack Kaiser didn't get picked. Warren literally reaches his arm out and grabs Kaiser. The umpire's standing right there. I mean, this happened right in front of him. Now, you can't see the umpire, but you know he is standing right there because they showed it before the play. He is standing right there where this happened. No call. There's no way you couldn't see that. There's absolutely no way you couldn't see that. You didn't see that because you didn't want to see that. Yeah. And I just hope that Marcus Freeman takes this kind of BS calls and takes it to these people and say, enough of this. We're going to start exposing this publicly if you don't start doing something about it, because that was as egregious as anything I've ever seen in all of the playoff games. It's just so obvious. And so anyway, I just had to get that out there because it just drove me nuts when I saw it.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, Mike, but yeah, just exactly what you're saying, because they did the exact same thing on the play where, the one where McElroy was like, oh, if Aller hit him here, he might have went 90. Yeah. Osbury got picked, and it was blatant. Like, you have to call that. You have to call that. And I mean, man, props to Notre Dame and for how they run their rub routes, because you don't see Notre Dame, like, they run what Notre Dame does there, and props to Mike Brown, props to those receivers for like running the defensive back into that guy to make that guy bubble and go around and give them space to create openings and all that.
Yes. Yeah.
Warren is literally like you said, grabbing guys, or like he literally just like shoulder checked like Osbury. And I was like, how did you not mention this? That was why he was so open. Like, yeah, it was, whatever. If they get away with it, fine. They get away with it, but it's just for that to happen and to be that egregious. It's always bad too when the guy who's the officiating expert. So Terry McCauley, who everybody knows who would do the NBC stuff all the time, and everybody hated because he's just the ref or whatever, chiming in. When he's coming on Twitter and talking about how the refs screwed up a call all the time against Notre Dame in these games too, and people know that he was definitely not for Notre Dame.
No, definitely not. Yes.
Yeah, he definitely called it however he thought he saw it, right? Which fair enough, and definitely people thought it was against Notre Dame. But for him to come out and be like, no, this was like the Christian Gray, hold get called. He said there were 3 guys. He's like, based on where the play was, there are 3 officials who are staring right at that spot. For not one of them to throw a flag, that there, he's like, it's basically in other words,
it's on purpose, is what it is. It's not incompetence. It's on purpose. They're not doing it for a reason. They're not incompetent. They just, it'd be one person if it'd be incompetent. But as you said, all those guys were there.
I heard that the SEC refs are going to be calling this game. Which
great.
I was going to say
it'd probably be better than what we've had.
I was going to say this might be the only time SEC refs in a Notre Dame game might be a good thing, because I think they probably hate Ohio State more than they hate Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So that might actually turn out to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Jamie pointed out the video that Notre Dame put out about the Jack Kaiser one and how late the flag was and where it came from. And so Marcus is pointing at that back judge, because that back judge got over on Notre Dame in the last 2 games now. And I think, like, people who are listening, like, complaining about ref, this is our second time around with these guys. And that back judge inserted himself into so many plays where it's like you have 2 other refs who are closer, who are calling nothing. Like the great household in the game against Georgia, where Jadarian Price had the big run. He calls that, you can see it on all 22. He calls that from 30 yards away. He chucked that flag so far, and he couldn't even get it to where the penalty was. That's how far away he was. Like, he called the flag on that. He called the flag on Kaiser. He called the hold. He called the other pass interference on Kaiser. Like, he missed nothing that was against Notre Dame. And, like, I don't know that he made a call that was in Notre Dame's favor. Like, because on the interference against Raritan, that came from the side judge. Side judge called that. And he's standing in the middle of the field, exactly in line with where the grab is having. And he just, like, he's got that flag in the pocket. Like, that's why Marcus, when you look back, Marcus is pointing at him like, man, it's you again. You are always looking to call a penalty on Notre Dame. No calls against the opponent from that man in 2 games. He must have thrown 5 flags against Notre Dame in the 2 games. None against the opponent.
And you know that there's no repercussions. No, there's no repercussions for it. So he knows that. So he doesn't care. I'm just telling you, watch the end of the game. Watch the final kick. That ref is standing next to Franklin. He's standing right next to him. Watch his expression when it goes through. It tells you everything you want to know. Just watch his expression. It tells you everything you want to know. He was more disappointed than Franklin was in the outcome of that. And I'm just telling you, anyway, it doesn't matter. They won. We're not going to sit and harp on it. Let's move on to stuff that matters. Offensively, I think it's really hard to, I think a lot of people were frustrated with the first half. But I'll just be honest. Notre Dame was they were just not controlling the line of scrimmage. And there's only so much that a guy like Riley Leonard can do. And there's only so much that a guy like Mike Denbrock can do to call a game. And I mentioned this kind of on the boards and things like that. Everybody's like, well, we need to run outside, or we need to roll the pocket, or we need to do this. Well, if you roll to the right side, you've got Emil Wagner, who's struggling mightily with Abdul Carter. You're going to roll right into that pressure in Abdul Carter. If you roll to the left, you've got Tosh Baker, who's struggling mightily with no matter who they have over there. So you're going to roll into that pressure, right? You can't run outside because you're not setting the edge well there either against those players. I just think it was hard for Denbrock to really do anything that he wanted. The other thing is everybody kept saying screens. Jamie, how many times have we seen Riley Leonard throw a screen and the ball gets batted down? And it's not always on him. Some of the times it is, though. Yeah. It is, though. Yes, I agree. But, Notre Dame's offensive line have to do a better job of trying to keep the guy from jumping, too. And go ahead.
I mean, that's definitely part of it. I think, there were things too, like that they had to change within their running game. Like I think that Tom Allen came out with like a really good, he was just aggressive where they run blitz like all the time in the first half. Yeah. And, Notre Dame should have probably had like more like counters for that, like where they should have like done some like RPO stuff, found some things with like where they were like they're blitzing that nickel all the time, and they just they didn't have a good beat on it, and that guy like blew up the play a lot. So even if they were doing a decent job up front, that guy's still coming in making the play. It becomes like a 2-yard gain instead of like maybe a 4 or 5 whatever yard gain. So I think that had some stuff to do with it. They had to change some things, certainly. I actually think the best thing that they did was just kind of decide, like, obviously they came out and they ran the ball like right away and established it in the second half. Did a fantastic job. And I think too, there has to be something that said where I don't know if Jeremiah Love, like maybe he got a shot at halftime, maybe he ran different in the second half.
Yeah.
He absolutely ran different, where he ran like the guy that he was, even though you could tell he's not exactly the guy he was, but he ran that same like hard that he did against USC, the beginning of that game, where you're like, oh my gosh, Love came to play this game. Like that was, a huge difference maker for them. And third down, to be 11 of 17 on third down, like
incredible.
Incredible. And Notre Dame has been a bad third down team. They were bad like the whole regular season, pretty much, and really, if you think about it, against Indiana and against Penn State, who were both really good third down defenses, and to convert that many times, and obviously some of that is the Riley Leonard run game stuff. They obviously did that a lot more in the second half too, which was, they needed to. They knew it's like, hey, we can't save you for next week, right? Like you have to, we've got to just do it, and hopefully the 12 days you'll be okay to kind of like bounce back after. But I mean, even after, because I think when you get a guy who gets his bell rung and they're checking to see if he has a concussion, normally you might say, hey, we can't run him as much, but it was like, well, they cleared him, so we have to run him, and that was definitely a big thing. And I mean, you can't really say enough about Jay Greathouse too, and like kind of what he did in this game, like,
or Steve Angeli.
And Steve Angeli. And I wanted to bring up both those guys for a specific reason, because both those guys, state champions in high school, right? Like guys who won big games in high school, played in big games. And KVA, another guy who won the thing and was like the best guy in those games. There is something to that.
Yeah,
I think that is a real thing. When guys have played in pressure situations, I mean, I don't care if it's freaking peewee football and you do it, but if you have guys who are used to performing in situations when there's pressure in those things, and you're like, man, this guy's in it, there's a value in that is different than everything else. And I think you saw that with those guys in that situation, because there's a lot of guys who shrink in those scenarios, and those guys, it was just like, I don't want to say they raised their game. It was just like, it's just another game to them because they're used to that. And it was truly like, awesome to just see, what those guys were able to accomplish. And also too, for Denbrock to know, like, hey, Greathouse has been great in this game. We got to get him the ball. Yeah. And I think that was huge.
Yeah. It's good to see. It's good to see that he is emerging, and Faison's starting to come on a little bit too, which is good. I will say, I think Notre Dame's wide receivers got to do a better job of blocking, especially in this game coming up. I didn't see a lot of great blocking in this last game. I do think Greathouse did a good job, and I think that Thomas does a really good job as a blocker, and why we're seeing him block and play a lot more. And he's done some really good things, Jaden Thomas has. So it's good to see him kind of emerge. I think we ought to give credit as well to a guy like Tosh Baker. I know a lot of people question, whether he should start and what he should do. But look, the guy got thrown in there in the fire against some really good players. And while he didn't play flawless, he played a lot better than I thought he would. And he obviously gave up some sacks that hurt the team. But that's to be expected because of, he is a second string player. But I thought he really kind of held his own and did some things that gave me some confidence that if they do play him, maybe it isn't going to be the worst thing. And then, of course, I rewatching the film, I thought Jagusa was the best offensive lineman they had. I thought he was just outstanding in this game. And it's amazing to consider that he has not played. They just throw him in there, and he is just throwing guys around, and he's pulling with authority and doing a good job in pass pro. I mean, Jamie, you haven't played guard. You haven't played much at all. You come out and you do as well as you do in pass pro. I mean, that's really impressive. So Jagusa is going to be an absolute star. First round draft pick. There's no doubt about it in my mind. This guy's going to be a star. Your thoughts here?
Yeah, I do want to give props to Baker because
I agree.
Obviously he's not someone that I think there's a reason that he's not the starter, but he could have. There's so many guys that after you get beat early, and he stepped into the game and got beat early. He gives up obviously the strip sack on that drive that Notre Dame was fortunate to recover. But he didn't go on tilt and it was bad the rest of the game. And you've seen it happen to a lot of guys. You've seen it to guys that Notre Dame's gone up against. I mean, I thought he battled. I
agree.
And was pretty decent in the run game too. But man, Charles Jagusa is wow. I'm blown away. But I was blown away by what he did in this game under the circumstances.
Incredible.
And I have a feeling. This is not anything we know. They're obviously being kind of vague about it, but I have a feeling that if Rocco is good to go, then they will move him to.
I was just going to ask you,
and that's where he'll play in this game.
I was just going to ask you, yeah, does that make the most sense?
I think it makes the most sense, but actually, I'm not even sure if it makes the most sense because this is the problem with Ohio State is that Tyleik Williams, who obviously played against Notre Dame last year, he was a problem. He was an absolute problem, and he's been a problem, all year. They're very good at defensive tackle. Jack Sawyer and JT Tuamolo, those guys are problems.
Yeah, big problems.
So it's one of these things where you can have him there, and it's okay, well, we feel better about our interior now. But man, I do think it's an awful tough assignment for. It's going to be a tough assignment for Emil Wagner, and it's going to be a tough assignment for whoever is the left tackle too. So I don't know. It's not I do think it's something where they probably the reason why he doesn't want to be vague, doesn't want to say which guy's not going to be playing because they frankly they might need them all of them in the game, but I do think just because of just the pass pro stuff, I do think they'll probably move him there. And then also to even just in the run game, I think he just moves people. That's what he's just a beast. He's a monster.
Yeah. And I'd say right now, the next best run blocker right now would be the guy next to him in Schrouth. I think Schrouth, if you got something you can work with on that right-hand side, which is where they traditionally ran a lot anyway, I think that will certainly help the situation. I thought Aeneas had probably the worst game he's had, pass pro, blitz pickup in this game. But what I did see they do a number of times, not a number, but a couple for sure, is send him out and kind of chip an edge here and there. And when they did that, they had some plays and they were able to do some things. Do you think that that's going to be the thing that they have to do is, use him to chip, use their tight ends to chip, because the pressure is going to come, but you don't know whether it's going to come from Sawyer. You don't know whether it's going to come from JT. You don't know whether it's going to come from, the interior. And if Rocco is, still banged up with that ankle, you got a problem. And look, I watched Rocco walk off. I don't think his ankle is anywhere near as bad as some of these others. Like, he walked better than what I saw Howard Cross walk. So I don't think that it was terrible, but I think he should be a guy that probably could come back and play in this game. So I don't know. I mean, how are you going to stop this? And how are you going to stop? Because that they're going to try and load up, do what everybody else has done, which is make Notre Dame one-dimensional, take away their running game, and then make Riley Leonard beat them. And so I don't know your thoughts here. What can they do?
I mean, I think that is going to be the thing, is that Riley Leonard is going to kind of have to beat them, because they are going to overload it, and you're going to have success throwing on first down, because you can't get into 3 and long against them. All these teams, obviously we know that Notre Dame is not a great 3 and long team, but Jim Knowles is such a good coordinator. He does such a good job with attacking protections with his blitz stuff. I think they are probably the best at executing the blitz out of any of the teams that Notre Dame has played all year. They just know how to time it up and just fit it so well. And because of that too, you're forced to kind of do things where Aeneas will have to be there in blitz pickup, and he won't be able to chip these guys, because they're always, I would say they're probably gonna rush 5 a majority of the time. When they're yeah, right. And so I think that's what, where in order to do that, you have to be able to, and this is something I think that, if I would say with Mike Denbrock, they got to do more of this game. They got to play action more. And they have to set up some of that stuff and create more things there through play action, because I just don't think that, there is a scenario where I could see Notre Dame getting into a situation a la Texas A&M, where, a la Georgia, where it's late in the game, and yes, they have success running, but I don't think they're going to be come out and just run the football down the throats. It's just not going to happen. And it's not just about listing the guys up front. It's just that they do so many different things in terms of bringing their safeties and all that to kind of mess you up in terms of the run game. So I think it's going to be important to get first down success, throwing the ball, play action, and, get into a point late where you can say I know that they've won these games and they've been dominant, and they won this game at the end of the game, but let's be honest, Sark kind of gave it to him with that toss call. He kind of gave it to him. He should have honestly, because if I'm looking at it, and obviously they gave up those plays to get them into that situation. Ohio State, I still think they don't got it when it's hey, it's time to really be physical there at the end of a game kind of thing in a fourth quarter situation. It's why they lose to Michigan. It is why they lose, one of the reasons why they lose to Michigan. But you got to get it to that point. And
yeah, I agree.
Early on, you can't because if you are playing from behind, and always chasing, that's when you're in a bad spot against them.
It was interesting because they came out and they looked like world beaters on that first drive, and then Henderson has that stupid penalty, and it just took all the wind out of their sails offensively for a while, and they just couldn't seem to overcome their own mistakes. And I think that's what you have with this team, with Ohio State, is they're they tend to lack focus at times, and you need to make them uncomfortable on offense. And a lot of people said, well, look, Texas did such a great job. They gave Notre Dame the game plan. Well, Texas is his own team. That's not what Notre Dame is. Notre Dame's a man team, and you can't just suddenly become a great zone team. You just and let's be honest, when Notre Dame has played zone, they haven't been overly effective doing it all year. So it's kind of like, all right, well, we feel like we need to throw, even though we've been a run team the entire time. So now we're going to throw the ball all over the place. You just can't do that. So, and expect to be very good. And it's kind of one of these things, Jamie, where I go back to that Minnesota Detroit game, right? And everybody's like, well, Detroit's got to play zone. They got to play zone. There's no way that they can control and handle the receivers and the tight end that Minnesota has. They got to play zone. And then Aaron Glenn and Dan Campbell come out, and you say, you know what, screw that, man. We're going to be us, and let the chips fall where they may, because that's who we are, and we're not going to bow and change for anybody. And I think his team just was like, really, you're going to let us do this? You have that much confidence in us? I almost think that Notre Dame has to do that, and hey, if Smith beats you, he beats you. We've seen what happens with Gray when he struggles. He doesn't quit, right? We see he doesn't quit. And Leonard Moore's done a great job. He's done a great job the whole entire year. Jordan Clark's done a great job. So the only way Notre Dame, I think, can affect them offense is to make them uncomfortable. And I think the only way that they can do that and have a lot of success with it, Jamie, is they're just going to have to be who they are and let the chips fall where they may. Your thoughts here?
Well, the other thing is that Notre Dame just doesn't have the guys to win enough up front if they just rush 4 all the time. They can't. Sure. They just don't. And I know that they have injuries up front, but even where you would even say last year, Howard Cross, I think he had 8 pressures or something. It's just something ridiculous in that game.
Yeah.
Where he was just whooping their center. Tyler Hindman, who, by the way, is playing guard for them right now, right? Or he might actually move to center because they
he is. They moved Montgomery to guard.
They moved to center, yeah. And Montgomery's been good for them. He's been good. But that is a guy that you would say, healthy Howard Cross, he's going to whoop this guy. He's going to whoop him.
He would, yeah.
Maybe Howard Cross can kind of get healthy enough to do that and win that. But even then, you just don't have enough guys to consistently win there. Just as when you're just rushing 4, you still have to be able to do stuff with stunts and other pressures. And that's what Notre Dame does. Notre Dame can't just pretend hey, we're going to just we're going to play too high the whole time and just try to make sure that Jeremiah Smith does. You're right. You can't do that. Yes, sometimes whatever. Sometimes they are going to put a guy over the top and all that, but you have to be able to, mix it up, but you have to stay who you are, because ultimately, really, it's going to be probably the linebackers that make those kind of havoc plays in terms of pass rush kind of stuff, disrupting Howard, who's been fantastic, obviously, in the last 3 weeks. Yeah. He's been fantastic. Yeah. So,
but you can force him into mistakes.
You definitely can. And he's made it. And that's the thing, right? Because if you look at all the games where they, losses, he made critical mistakes in their own red area, right? Where he's throwing and giving the ball to Michigan or whatever. Against Penn State, he throws the pick 6, fumbles the ball going into the end zone against Penn State. By the way, they would have smoked Penn State without these turnovers. That would have happened.
Yeah,
but
sure.
That's ultimately what it's going to take. Notre Dame is going. I mean, obviously Notre Dame does that. That's what Notre Dame does. They're the best at it in the country. But that has to happen again for them, which is why I say havoc has to happen. Notre Dame's not getting havoc unless they're continuing to attack. And that's so I think they have to be who they are. That's what got them here. You change, you tweak, you do different things to, protect against obviously a really, really good offense. And I do think like Chip Kelly, when he's kind of in his bag, it can be like a devastating play caller, right?
No doubt.
But I also see times when Chip Kelly is like, when he doesn't have the answers coming out at the start of the game,
he looks like Bill Diedrich.
I don't think he's a guy. I think he's a guy, if he's got a plan and he's got you, oh man, right? Then it's pedal to the metal, full speed go, and then it's tough. But if you get him
early, he has
early,
answers. Yeah.
No, I don't think he's a guy who finds answers as much. I think he's the guy who he comes up with these answers beforehand, and then if you have counters, so that I think is also going to be a big part of the game.
Yeah, if your counters are effective. Now, Yama, you and I are very, very similar when it comes to kind of going and looking at these matchups. And I know that you did the same thing I did in Texas. We haven't talked about this, but I'm just going to guess for sure that you did. And because everybody kept talking about how great Texas defensive line was. I thought 91 was a really good player, the big guy that's 330. I was not really impressed with any of their defensive linemen. And when I look at their offensive line, meaning Ohio State, Donovan Jackson certainly is a very good player, but I think he struggles with smaller guys, guys who are quicker because he's so big. And then I look at Josh Fryer and I see the same thing. I think he's a pretty good player, but I don't think he's great. I really don't. I think Hinsman can be got. I think that Montgomery can be got. There's opportunities there. It's just, how do you attack these guys? Because I don't think this offensive line is as good as Penn State's. I really don't. And, the key, as we've talked about, is you got to affect Howard. And the problem is with Howard is when he gets loose, man, you got to be disciplined, right? You can't give him big running lanes because he can hurt you running the football. So I don't know if you're Al Washington, if you're Golden, how do you go about this? And as you mentioned, they're going to need linebackers to blitz. And, you're just going to have to live with what Jalen Snead does negatively. You're just going to have to live with what KVA does negatively, because what they can bring positively is way better than anybody else that they have out there right now. And if you're going to win this game, it's going to come down to how many negative plays can Notre Dame make, on defense, and how can they affect Howard? Because if you can affect Howard, doesn't matter how good Smith is, doesn't matter how good Abuka is, doesn't matter how good what's the kid, the other
Cornell Tate.
Yeah, Cornell Tate. Doesn't matter how good he is, if you can affect them. So what do you do here?
I mean, I think it is all about affecting Howard, and obviously stopping the run too. And they do a lot of different stuff too, where like in this game, you saw them do a lot of stuff with like Egbuka, where they were getting him in the perimeter. So, that's obviously something you got to worry about with them there. But like, I think what you have to do, because I think like Hinsman Hinsman's not a good player. He's not a good player. Like that's a guy, like if Notre Dame isn't winning that matchup, that's bad. Like he's not a good player. Like there's a reason he was a backup, right? He lost his starting job, right? So, and Jackson, I think, has done a pretty good job as a left tackle, kind of switching over, but he's not a natural left tackle. And so I think, that's something that to be watching. I think Fryer, he's a guy who struggles with movement. Like he's a super tall, lengthy guy. If you just rush straight out to the edge and he can ride you out, he'll do that. But if you give him movement and you make him think, that's where he struggles. And I really, I don't think their line when McLaughlin and forget the left tackle's name, but the left tackle who was out for the year, Josh Simmons, when those guys were healthy, they were really good. I thought they played really, really well, and they've been better, I think, than obviously when they first made the switch to all these guys. And I do think Montgomery, I think he's actually better than their right guard. And he'll get after it as a run blocker. But I think there's things that, if you get a lot of movement and you're able to like kind of mess them up with some like, early down like stunts and twists and stuff like that, I think you can really kind of like screw them up. And that's kind of always been, and that was really kind of one of the things too last year when they were going against them too. And that, I mean, it's different players, obviously. And I actually think it's probably a worse line than it was last year. I don't think they had a great line last year.
I think it definitely is a worse line, but Notre Dame does not have the same defensive lineman they have.
Yeah, that's the main thing. That's the difference, right? So that's why you need. I mean, Uyeyama's got to have the team of Georgia game. Like they have to have all that from those guys, and those guys have to play, just their absolute best games. And if they do that, then that could be, a really good thing. And that's also too, like, I mean, Bryce Young has obviously had some moments, but wouldn't it be something if he had this was the Bryce Young game? It'd be a pretty good time to have it. Yeah.
Man, you watched him in that last game. He was all over the field. He just was not
what a motor
there. I mean, man, that guy's going to be a star. There's no doubt about it. And he was all over the field and just was just a shade late every single time.
Yeah.
And cannot wait to see what he does. So is there a way we could get Dawson to play this game? That certainly would be nice if we could add him to the mix. So that's the last topic I want to get to is, because obviously you guys will be breaking down the game a tremendous amount throughout this week on Hit and Hustle. But what the portal guys, how you feeling about this? I put a post up and I actually think I'm really excited about this group. I really think they did a very good job of filling the things that they needed to. I know a lot of people were questioning Hughes as far as, well, why hasn't he had success at USC and those types of things. But gosh, when you watch his film, you're like, man, his high school film, you cannot teach his arm length. You can't teach his explosion. He plays very, very hard. They don't have anybody on the roster right now that I would say looks and can do the things that he does. And Al Washington's a good coach. So, when I look at all the players that they've added in this portal, I'd say I'm pleasantly surprised. I would have loved to have maybe more of a home run hitting wide receiver, one more. But overall, I think they did a really good job. Your thoughts here?
I thought they did a great job. Obviously, I really like both the DVs, Devontae Smith, Stroman. I think those are it falls in line with Jordan Clark, Rod Hurd, same kind of thing, like quality, high IQ football guys. Both guys play with an edge, physical edge. They fit the mentality of Notre Dame's defense and what they want to do. They're also guys that I think will come in and they're not going to be swimming, like picking up the new defense. Like it'll take some time, but with Clark and Hurd, it didn't take them much time. Like they were playing at a pretty high level right away. And I think that's big right away because obviously you needed that depth there and you needed those guys to kind of step in. But I really think like Dawson, I think it is big because at the bare minimum, he is like your third defensive tackle and like a good player, like a quality guy. So I think that helps. Hughes, I liked him. I like him. And I think he's out of, you got to remember, if you're not going to get one of these defensive tackles that would have cost them who knows how much money to get some of these guys that went around, there's like, some of these guys like the Keyshawn Silvers and the Shaws and those guys who were like former 5-stars, 330 guys. Those guys really haven't played that good, in their careers. Not to say that they couldn't be, you wouldn't want them, but like they're probably just in terms of what they've actually done and played, haven't really played great. And two, if you're going to take another guy, I take a guy, you're obviously going to need somebody at defense. Take a guy who has eligibility left. He's got 2 years, and take a guy with traits. And that is Hughes. So I think he's got a shot. And I think all that's really what you want to look at. Honestly, I went back and watched every rep that he took against Notre Dame. He was good in the game. He was good. I think he's got a chance to be and develop into something. So I think that's big. Obviously, they needed the depth of tight end. So picking up Ty Washington, I think, was like just a good move just because I think they just need numbers there, right? And he can at least play. But the receivers this year that they brought in they're just frankly better than the guys that they brought in the previous years. They just are, right? And they've had more proven production, right? And I don't know. I think it's up in the air how good Malachi Fields can be. Like, I wouldn't say like no one should just pencil him in to be like, he had 800 yards at Virginia last year. He's going to do this at Notre Dame. It's like, well, what's he going to do when you get into these situations, when you're in a playoff game, you're playing against this top corner, that top corner, where are you going to be? But it's not out of the question that he makes that Claypool jump into there. Like he's got he's incredible physical, ability. And Pauling is a good player. Like he will at the very least be someone who will help the team. And it wouldn't be shocking if you're like, man, this guy caught 50 balls next year. So those guys, I think, and plus Brown knows him and knows what he's about. And obviously like Bowden and Freeman and everyone knows him too, because, he was a Cincinnati kid. So I think I really like what they did. They had the kicker obviously as well, which I think is, important. And it's going to be, are any of these guys going to come in and be like the absolute like difference maker types? No, probably not. But look how valuable the guys have been this year that they've picked up, and really the guys the last couple of years, really. And that's what they've done. They've done a good job evaluating those guys. The hit rate has been pretty high. And most of the guys have gotten better at Notre Dame, been better than they've been at their previous ones.
Agree.
And like a little bit different to say like a Chris Mitchell who's making that jump from an FIU, whatever. But all these other guys have played in Power 4 conferences. You're taking guys who have already played in Power 4 conference and made plays. So I think that I like all of that because I don't know, like whether or not like there's a chance for some of these guys to really jump up, but at the bare minimum of what they're coming in, the floor is already pretty high with like the majority of them.
Well, I think they got, they needed to make sure that they got at least one defensive lineman that they knew could be like come in and play right away. And, I think you mix him with Rubio and you've got something there. Right. And then, we'll see what happens at the other spots and who you bring in. But when I look at Hughes, the upside is really, really big for that guy. I think he could be a really special player if you coach him up. And again, he's got to want to do it. So we don't know how much of this didn't work because he wasn't really done. I just think that his upside is really good, and he's a different type of player than a lot of the guys that they have there right now. And his quickness could really come into handy. I mean, people don't realize the thing that made Howard Cross and Riley Mills who they are is the quickness they have. And, you're not going to get that in Rubio. And when I look at Dawson, I think he's quicker than Rubio, but, he's not going to be Howard Cross. He's not going to be Riley Mills. So you need somebody in there who can be a little bit quicker. And, of course, you got Don Heinisch there as well, who will get bigger, a little bit bigger and a little bit better. But I think that landing those guys were really, really important. I think a boundary, somebody you could trust. I think Malachi will at least do that. He'll at least be a guy that you can trust to throw the ball, and he's going to come down with it. And that, can he make big plays downfield? I don't know. I don't know if that's his game. But somebody on third down that's a big target that you can throw to, That's something that they need desperately right now. And he's got a lot of experience, and so I like it. But as you mentioned, I really think Devonta Smith may be the best out of this whole group. He's played at a very high level. He's been very, very effective. I think they got to rein him in a little bit. But, you know, this kid made the best decision of his life, I think, at coming to play for the coach that he did. And I think Stroman realizes that as well. And Stroman's just like, man, if I could just get healthy, right? If I can just be healthy and get coached up a little bit more, I think I could be a pretty good player. And I think he can bring that. So overall, I love what they did in the portal. I'm very excited about it. And I think all these guys can really help the program. So, you know, I think a lot of people think that there's all these great impact, huge impact players in the portal, but there really aren't, Jamie. These are depth pieces. No. These are guys who can fill a hole. That's really what they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, folks, that's going to be it. Remember, we're going to have all kinds of stuff this week. All kinds of stuff with Hit and Hustle. And, of course, we'll be all over Irish Sports Daily as well. We appreciate everything. Thanks for listening to the show, folks. And we will talk to you next Monday before the big game. So looking forward to it. And we'll talk a whole lot more about this Ohio State game. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week on Power Hour.